Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mind Your Mission. Today, we're continuing our Prioritizing Marriage series. We've been talking about communication, sacrifice, commitment, and endurance in marriage, but those things don't start in marriage. They are learned somewhere else first. Today's conversation is all about that first relationship, the one with God that sets the tone for all the others. Today, we're talking with our friend Myah Olstad about the themes from her books, Married to God and Submission, Let Go, Let God, and how Scripture frames our relationship with God not as something casual or convenient, but as covenantal, marked by commitment, humility, endurance, and surrender. So if you've ever felt like your faith has become transactional or seasonal or driven more by feelings and faithfulness, then this episode is for you. Our hope is that this conversation doesn't tell you how to live, but invites you to honestly reflect on how your relationship with God is functioning and how prioritizing that relationship might actually strengthen every other one in your life. Myah, before we dive too deep into the episode, do you mind telling our audience who you are, what you do, and why you wrote these books?
Well, first off, I just want to thank Liz and Erin for having me be on today and just to talk about this. They were huge mentors of mine when I was at school and both after I graduated. So thank you to them for doing this podcast and honestly just being such great role models. But yeah,
It's our pleasure, Myah.
yeah.
So sweet.
So yeah, I went to the Coast Guard Academy. Liz and Erin were my cadre, and we were all in Officer Christian Fellowship together. And then, so as I graduated, I was going through the motions of, trying to listen to what a lot of mentors told me of you need to practice what you preach. And I was a Christian both outside of work and at home and everywhere. Obviously, life takes its toll and things start to get real. And as I was, getting qualified and life just started happening, something was egging in the back of my mind of I never actually figured out how to say my testimony and then what was the major point of what did I learn. And that was something that I always struggled with because I feel like I learned so much, especially at the academy specifically, but I never could put into words. So I just thought, oh, I'll just start writing it down and just getting thoughts on paper. And then just one night, it was probably the Holy Spirit. It was the Holy Spirit saying, you really just learn how to have a relationship with God and how to be content in where you were and who He was as your Lord and Savior. And I just started writing about that, specifically in how the world, we love to talk about faith and having this such deep connection with God, but what does that look like practically? And I realized, well, if someone maybe just told me, even gave me a guide on how to have a relation with God, that would maybe have been so helpful. So that's kind of just what started happening. I just started writing and I thought I'll just use my pain. Hopefully people would learn and they wouldn't have to go through all the hardship that I did. And then how Submission, which is my second book that came out, it was really the other half, which is mostly my testimony of the core thing I had to learn both through my relationship with God, but also just in having a faith in general, was I had to submit, realize I wasn't in control and that God literally, we have to give up us and our flesh to actually let Him in and be able to work through us. And I couldn't have a fulfilled faith or life as a Christian if I didn't submit. So that's kind of how the idea of both of them started.
Mm-hmm. I met a new couple today. They're an OCF couple that live in our area. And they were asking oh, did you grow up a Christian? And my answer to that question is always kinda. I would have thought I grew up a Christian, but I always follow that up with, I didn't know it was a thing to have a personal relationship with God. I went to church and we did the Christian things, but I didn't know that the whole point is not religion, but relationship. And so that's you reading your books. It's that's the key. And if someone's missing that, which you can grow up your whole life, like I did, get to college and still be missing that key part. So that's why I think these books are super important. And before we talk about prioritizing marriage with a spouse, your books argue that we have to prioritize our relationship with God in the same ways. Can you explain why your goal in writing wasn't to tell people how to live, but to help them honestly assess how their relationship with God is actually functioning?
Yes. So a lot of Christians, we grow up knowing about the concepts of justification and sanctification, and how justification is what Jesus does for us when He dies on the cross. We are justified then before God. And everyone understands that concept more or less because it seems simpler. It's the sanctification part that people get confused with, of how then we live post. Because we are then justified, how can we go about living? And I feel where a lot of people get misconstrued, especially growing up, is that Jesus died for me, so then I have to now earn that love. And that's like the process of sanctification, when in reality, we don't earn anything. So, how this then applies to the relationship aspect. Because we don't have to earn and we're already justified, people don't know what to do with this free flowing love and grace that's just pouring down from heaven. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do with it? You first have to apply it to yourself. And I think that's where like the whole married to God thing comes into play, is because you have to admit to yourself that I needed justifying. I needed someone to die for me for my sin so that I can be with this father and be with this friend. And after you reach that point, then you realize he loves me despite the fact that I didn't do anything. And I'm going to pause there because that's you. That's you as an individual. Faith has to come from you and your heart. Other people in your life, they can support you, and you create this environment that is conducive for building that faith, but you should never be basing your faith off of the faith of other people. And that's where people get confusion with the whole sanctification process and then the body of Christ, because they think through sanctification, oh, if I have to earn my love from God, then I have to earn the love of other people. Hence, everyone's earning. When in reality, we're all sinners and we can't earn it. And then it's like, it's a whole mess that turns into pride and self identity issues. And that's a whole mess that we don't have to get into. So, yeah, the relationship aspect, God freely gives love to us. And when we finally understand that, then through our love back to Him, we then know how to love other people. But at the core of that, it's you as an individual have to knowing your faith and having that one-on-one with God, so then you can have that love with other people.
Yeah, I think a key point for me in my faith was just recognizing the height from which I had fallen. Like, I grew up, a good kid generally. Like, I wasn't straying too far from the goody two shoes kid my parents wanted me to be. Like, I was a good kid, but I didn't necessarily ever understand why I needed saving, like why I needed God. Like, I knew that He existed and I wanted to believe in Him and I wanted to be a Christian, but I just didn't understand that desperate need for a relationship, like I kind of mentioned earlier. And I had to really learn how to, one, see God in His right place, like so far holy and perfect, so far above me. And then also in light of that, I had to realize, okay, then that means I'm down here and I don't deserve any of this. What am I going to do with that? Well, I'm going to receive grace. Like, learning how to receive grace is so important. And I think that that mirrors what happens when couples in like marriage or dating avoid evaluating the health of their relationship and just focus on like doing the right things. Like, even in marriage now, like I can't earn Nolan's love by just doing all the right things. And in fact, like he just wants to sit with me and be seen. And like we can't earn that from each other because we're gonna fail, we're gonna mess up. It's like it's gonna be messy. But we have to learn to give grace and receive grace. So thank you for just the way that you answered that question.
And then in Married to God, you say that believers often date God instead of committing to Him. So what do you think that looks like practically? And where have you seen that tendency show up in your own walk with the Lord?
So, the practical sense, I feel like I did. I spent a whole chapter talking about what dating is and how it's a slightly more modern concept, and it's only really roughly just over 200 years old, maybe even younger. But the concept of dating in reality gives more power to both parties, of the comfort of knowing they could leave whenever they want. There's that back door. They haven't signed any documentation. They haven't paid any money. It's like, okay, we're just going to test this out. And then if it backfires, we can leave. And practically how this looks like living as a Christian, I feel like is the example of the extreme of the Christmas Christian, where they're going to go to church Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, maybe Easter. That's 3 times a year. Or it's maybe the ones that they live out the church life on Sunday and then they just do everything normal, or in a sense worldly, during Monday through Saturday. These are the people that it's more of a culture of, there's just something that they are used to growing up, and they're It's something that everyone else does, and that's what they do because they are like, oh, I'm choosing this. I do this because it makes me comfortable, but if I don't feel comfortable, I can leave. It's very much they think they're in control. I'm going to be saying that a lot today of we like being in control of a lot of things, and dating puts people in control of their relationship with God and both in their faith.
Yeah, I feel like that's so similar to in human relationships as well. Like in marriage, people will kind of sometimes have one foot in and one foot out, thinking that they can leave if it's not serving them, when in reality, marriage is a covenant, just like our relationship with God. Like it is a promise and it's not something to be taken lightly. So I like that you mentioned that and explained that.
One line in your book says that all of God's children at one point practiced a one-sided relationship while he never did. So this is kind of pointing out that God remains faithful while his people drift, ignore him, or return only when they need something, and that he never practices a one-sided relationship, but we often do. How does that change the way that we see God, not as distant or harsh, but as a loving father?
So when I was doing the research actually for this section, I got a lot of people very upset calling it a one-sided relationship in the first place. I think especially because how I introduced it was through the King David section of, how everyone, especially in the Christian faith, like holds these fathers of the faith, Abraham, Isaac, David very highly. We don't ignore when they mess up or when they fail, but I just use that as an example of we being in this relationship with God, we are on the side that's always failing. And God, who willingly enters into this relationship with us, fully expecting and knowing that we will fail, but he never does. And especially coming from the side that does fail, I just feel immense gratitude knowing that he's willing to stay, knowing we will mess up, fall short. I think I even go to the length in the book is calling it toxic. From the human perspective, God should leave, and he should have left a long time ago, especially with his chosen people, the Israelites. I go kind of in the length, but in the book, but obviously not as much as the Old Testament does in general, of how much turmoil and pain he goes through just from not only looking at book of Exodus, but also you can consider all the times that they were like outcasted in Babylon, like Assyria. I could go at length, but from the human standard, he should have left a long time ago, but he didn't. So just the immense gratitude and love. But then once again, like, what do we do with that? Because there's nothing that we can do to like reciprocate because we can't earn it. But he just wants us to accept it and acknowledge that he is Father and acknowledge his love.
Yeah, I feel like whenever I have moments in my faith where I'm like, wait a sec, is this really true? Like whenever
Yeah.
I have that moment of doubt, I think about it and I'm like, well, to be honest, like I don't think if anyone were to choose to make up a story like this, I don't know that this is the way that they would make it up because it doesn't make any sense. Really, like from our like small human brain perspective, like it doesn't make sense. Why would he stay? Why would he love us anyway? Like why would he offer grace? Like we don't deserve it at all. And so I think that really dwelling on that point that yeah, we don't, but he gave it anyway is super important.
One of the hardest truths in your book is that the attempts to even the score with God completely misunderstand grace. So why is performance such a tempting substitute for trust, both in our faith and in our marriages?
So going back to the control word that I used earlier, we like to be in control, or like we like to think that we are. And performance is once again keeping the ball in our court of I am in control of my own salvation. I am in control of if my life is good or bad. And by me doing the good things, then the good things will happen. It's a very circular reasoning, and in our human brains, it makes sense. But in reality, and it's not. Hence, performance is so enticing and easy for people to understand because it fits into our narrative of pride and the flesh. Of the flesh likes to, it motivates us. It's very like, it's motivated by things like greed or power, pride, that sort of things. And performance feeds into these. So when we do perform, we're feeding into the flesh. But obviously, God still wants us to strive and to have fruit to show not only like, oh, we love him, but show his love for us to others, hence the fruit of the Spirit. But that's where the fruit of the Spirit is not really performance. Performance, you're not looking at the heart aspect. It's very outwardly. striving has the implicit intention of also like you're being earnest. It's coming from the heart. Where performance, it's just a outward aspect. But once again, feeding into the flesh.
Yeah, it goes along the idea of like our fruits show our faith, but they don't save us. It's like a product of our faith, but that doesn't save us or make us become Christians or anything. So I like that you talked about that in your book. So I think it's an important distinction to make and important to understand.
And one quote that you have in there is that God just keeps giving and giving to his creation and rarely does he get anything in return. And man, like that's a humbling thing to just dwell on, like to pause. Like I know that we say it all the time, like God's grace, God's grace, God's grace, but like to think about that he doesn't get anything from us, like, yeah, we are seeking to glorify him, but like there's not much in it for him. So it's definitely humbling. And in your book, you define humility as accurately understanding where we stand before holy God, neither self exalting nor self loathing, which is something that we heard a lot from our particular mentor at the academy. So, why do you think that humility is so essential to a real relationship with God?
Really quick before I get into that, I do want to at least clarify why I don't use the more worldly definition of humility. And I've heard in some churches too where they just say their definition is thinking about others, not thinking about self. But that definition is it still puts you into that self-loathing, self-exalting
Yeah.
mindset. Because if you're thinking about others, then you have the potential of, oh, I'm not worth anything. And then you have a super low self-esteem, low mental health, which is like, then you're not doing the point of humility. Or you can have the other aspect where, oh, I'm thinking about others because I know it makes me look good, and then it turns into a pride issue. So I feel like that's why I like um, our Academy's mentor definition, just because knowing where we stand before a righteous God, but also understanding that that's where everybody else stands. Like no one is higher or lower before God because everyone's down below.
Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah.
no one's raised, no one's better than anybody. So you have to include God into the equation with humility.
Yeah. It puts the focus all on God instead of us.
Mhm.
And that's the whole point.
Yeah. Um, but then going into the question is like, because being in a relationship, any relationship, you have to think about it in the sense of, well, obviously the worldly sense of what do I have to gain? And you already said, Erin, like God doesn't gain anything, but he wants to know us. He wants to be intimate and want to participate in life, in our faith with us. Um, so approaching that relationship with him in that humility, I feel like you gain so much more just knowledge about God, knowledge about yourself and even the world and the word, and your spiritual maturity just skyrockets. I've slowly been learning both while I was writing these books, but also just in general, like when you are born again, it's like your faith doesn't just automatically get huge and then you're spending your whole life keeping it huge, or you're not just a mustard seed or it's constantly fluctuating. No, you have your faith, and your faith, you're striving to keep it constant, but it's being molded and being refined by the fire as it's used as the analogy throughout the Old Testament. But it's growing in maturity, and you're learning both in your own heart how to connect with God and know more about God so that not only you can grow in the personal relationship aspect, but also in how do I share this with others? Because ultimately Jesus did that call to the disciples in Matthew, go out and make disciples of all nations. You can't exactly do that if you don't have that backing of the Holy Spirit flowing from your heart, which that can only really come from a true relationship with God.
Yeah. I feel like as a baby believer, it's really tempting and easy to view it as like, okay, the more I know, like the more I will have arrived. Like the more I know, like, But really, it's the more I learn, the more I know, the more utterly dependent I am. And I just to compare this to parenting, like when we're raising our children, our goal is that they become less and less dependent on us as they get older. But that's not how it is with God at all. Like the goal with the Lord is for us to become more and more dependent. Like that dependency is a good thing. And sometimes I feel like we forget that we're not just trying to get to a certain point where we have it all figured out, where we're super wise and we're able to mentor all these girls because we know everything. Like that's not the goal. Yes, we will by God's grace be able to share what we've learned and our wisdom, but it's wisdom through learning that we're dependent, utterly dependent. So I think that that's like understanding that. And I have to remember that every single day. Like I forget that all the time, especially like doing something like a podcast where like I can sit here and pretend like I know what I'm talking about. Like, yeah, no, I'm learning what I know what I'm talking about is the fact that I'm utterly dependent.
And I think the other aspect too from that is because it's so against our nature. Like it is literally the human point of growth is you're growing up so that you move out of the house, that you have your own family, you can raise your own kids. It's totally against what we do here on earth. It's hard to comprehend that we have to do the reverse in terms of God.
Going off of depending on God, in your book, you talk about prayer as a relationship building dialogue. And I think it also allows us to depend on Him and not religious performance. So, what do you think would actually change in a believer's life if prayer felt more like a conversation than something that we just get right?
Yeah, I feel like prayer is a sore subject for some people. For some people, they only do it at church or they do it in group settings, and you slowly make it very Pharisaical or Sadducee to make those callbacks. But prayer, especially when I was at the academy, it just makes God more real. Because why would you talk to somebody if you don't think that they're there? I started making this more of a practice of saying prayers out loud, and I say this specifically in my book. If you are starting like the first date or you're engaging with God for the first time, like in that relationship aspect, if you believe he's there and you believe he's listening, you're making him real by talking to him out loud and you're praying to him out loud. Because God, like he, he doesn't live for the pomp and circumstance. Jesus talks about numerous times in the New Testament when the Pharisees are trying to, enforce the law or enforce the Sabbath. He's like, Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, and the Lord is of the Sabbath. And the law was not so that God could smell meats being burnt on a barbecue every day. No, it was an act of love. And being intimate is ultimately the greatest form of love we can give to God. And prayer in the quiet places, private, where no one can see, where it's just you and God, and you're just fully aware that He knows everything about me, but He's choosing to want to be in the moment with you. And I feel like that's why prayer has to be conversational. You have to like appreciate and understand that God just wants to talk. Like you're not doing it for anybody else except for you and God, which like prayer in community settings, like I don't dislike it. The power of prayer is huge. And especially like obviously the more people praying and calling out to God and asking for like a miracle or for healing, like it is huge and God will listen to prayer. But it's definitely a slippery slope if that's the only area that you do pray or like community prayer is more highly emphasized. But obviously then that's looking at the bigger picture. But right now we're focusing on the smaller.
Yeah, and I feel like going to church and worship and prayer there is great and it's great for your faith, but it really helps us know about God. But I feel like really true knowing God comes in your own personal relationship with Him, like in your daily reading with Him, and especially in prayer. I feel like that's where we really get to know God and just sit with Him and in His presence. And it is so important because I think about my relationship with my husband. Like, if I just knew about my husband, we wouldn't have a very good relationship. Like, if I just knew what someone had told me about him, it wouldn't be as deep as it is when I actually know him and have like deep, meaningful conversations with him.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like prayer is one of those things that I also did not understand growing up. Like I would pray, but I didn't really think that people thought they were talking to someone. Like we just are saying this together because it feels good to say it together. That's kind of what you guys are talking about. Like, I I didn't myself know that I was talking to God. And saying it out loud, that's another thing. You pointing that out was good because I mean, all of us, I feel like, but I especially just always get distracted. Like when I'm not praying out loud, like it's really easy to just drift and start thinking about other things or to do list or like my grocery list. That's what I was thinking about this morning when I was trying to pray. I was like, oh, my grocery. And it's like, Aaron,
Mhm.
but praying out
Yeah.
loud helps me to not do that. And I also really enjoy well, Nolan and I have been trying to sit down and journal more just because as a parent, I feel like things are happening really fast to you, and not often do we have time to just sit down and reflect. So we've been trying to journal more. And I've journaled a lot of different seasons of my life, but Nolan hasn't so much. And he was asking me, so like, are you writing to your diary? Or are you writing like to your future self? He was asking me like who I write to. And I told him, I was like, well, sometimes it starts like just talking about my day, but it often ends up like, Lord, this and God, this and Jesus, this, because I end up praying through journaling. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I feel like where my relationship with God started. Obviously, it wasn't like this was pre-born again, Maya. It was in middle school. My dad went on deployment for the Navy, and he got us all journals. And he's like, "Oh, you guys can pretend that you're writing to me while I'm away, and then I'll read it when I get back." So I tried that, but it didn't really feel right. So I changed it to instead of "Dear Dad" to "Dear God," and I just made it about prayer. And I've been kind of just doing that ever since. And especially, you probably don't notice on the podcast, but I actually was born with a speech impediment. Talk about it a little bit in my submission book, but it made talking always hard. So when I started praying like earnestly, it was always those weird moments where I never stuttered when I was talking to God, which was always such relief and just peace. But honestly, just writing my thoughts and my prayers in journals, just I could always clearly articulate what I was wanting to say, how I knew it was either wrong and this is the right way of thinking, and God could help me process what I was thinking, but also what I was feeling, and then point it back to Him. And that's where, like, in your head, it's like obviously you get so distracted, as Erin, you were saying. Yeah, I feel like us as humans in general, we have that problem because I do that all the time, and that's like that's why I feel like both speaking out loud, but also prayer journaling is such a great way for people to not only stay focused on talking to God, but also both getting what's in their heads just out into space so that both they can process it, but also leading us back to obviously the center, which is Jesus.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you touched on that. And another thing you talk about in your book is the honeymoon phase of faith. And I don't know that I had heard anyone else call it that before, but I'm really glad you did because I've felt that way. I have a vivid memory in my journal actually. I wrote in my journal, wow, like the honeymoon phase with God, like I had that realization that it felt like that. But you talk about how that emotional closeness, that excitement, the spiritual highs, you kind of warn against building faith on feelings alone. Why do you think emotional highs so often become spiritual expectations?
I think actually that's so funny that naming it the honeymoon phase was a complete last minute because I was like, what do I call this chapter? And it's just like, immediately after you get married, everyone's like, oh, the honeymoon phase where they're both happy and nothing bad goes
Blissful.
wrong. So it just made sense. So yeah, but yeah, so spiritual highs, especially, people just feel like they can tell something's happening, something different that they haven't experienced before. It's not the normal. And because it's not normal, they instantly can relate it. Oh, that's God, Holy Spirit, He's moving. And because it feels so unworldly, they're like, oh, God is only here if I'm feeling this because it's not the normal. It's not standard, which when you're fighting against other modern things like American prosperity gospel and all these pastors telling you that God doesn't want you to be in pain, you aren't going to go through trials, you just got to pray to Him and everything's going to be okay. And it's completely against what Jesus talks about specifically at the Last Supper, where He's like, they persecuted the master, the students will also. And He plainly tells you, like, there were going to be trials. And I think I talk about in both of my books that life will eventually happen, but doesn't take away at all from the good feelings that you are experiencing right now. Like,
Mhm.
he wants you to rejoice, be glad, and to in seasons of laughter to laugh, and when you're joy to be joyful. But just remember, and to just use that in the sense of refortifying yourself and your foundation. I was talking with a friend of ours, Bladen, actually recently, about this, and the way I described it is like, you say you live in a kingdom, and you know that the enemy is going to attack us in 3 months, but you're in a season of a lot of prosperity, obviously. So you're going to stock up. You know, okay, we're going to take in a lot of food, a lot of water. We're going to prepare, but things are going good right now, but they're not going to be good later. So it's like you're preparing for a siege, but things are good right now. So you can acknowledge that it's, but knowing that there'll be trials to come because we're human. That's life.
Yeah.
And honestly, especially when you're with your Christian, it's a guarantee.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Just like if you're a kingdom preparing for battle, like I have been recently reminded of this just because of some hard stuff that people in my life are going through. Just how important the everyday faith is. Like, why is it important to read the Bible when you don't feel like you really need God? Well, because when you do need Him one day, you're going to need those verses written on your heart because it's in those times of trial that you're not going to like maybe sit there and just have time to like fluffy, quiet time, coffee, sunrise, like sit there and read the word, but like you're going to need them, like your actual faith, not just your feelings to rely on. So, yeah, it's been hitting deep for me recently, the faith over feelings and what faith actually means.
Yeah, and going off of that, like trials, we are promised trials in this lifetime. Like it just how life is sometimes. And you write in your book, Myah, that growth doesn't come from avoiding trials, but from walking through them with God's strength rather than our own. So, what would you say it looks like to stay relational with God when disappointment or the pain from the trials feels overwhelming?
Yeah. So I'm going to list a more newer example because obviously when you're young in the faith and trials happen, you don't see the point of them in the moment. You see it post. But this newest one, I could tell in that moment, even when I was going through it, that God is with me and He is giving me strength in this moment. And it was just so cool to be able to acknowledge that while it was happening. That never happened before, but mostly it was definitely through heavily meditating on Philippians 4, starting at verse 12. I'm reading from the ESV. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need, for I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And I was meditating on this verse for so long because everyone obviously focuses on the back half of
Mhm.
I could do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But I was constantly getting hung up on I know how to be brought low and how to abound, which goes through like the trials of life. But the word that I loved was I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hungry. You have to learn that. No one's born with, I just know how to rely on God, not even Jesus. Paul even talks about later in the chapter how Christ had to learn obedience even to the point of death on the cross. Something that we all have in common. We have to learn it. You have to go through the trials with God and learn to rely on Him in the moments when you don't want to or you don't know how, because no one has that kind of strength, especially against the spiritual battles that are constantly waging around us, but also the physical and emotional stuff that happens to people close to us or just happen to ourselves physically. Stuff takes a toll, and just God, He is the three omnis, omnipresent, all knowing, and then all powerful. But how do we access that power? By giving it to Him and relying on Him. And how that looks like practically. Um, so last year, I lost a good friend, a good Christian friend to suicide. And I've lost a lot of people to suicide. I did not handle it the way that I should have numerous times, but this one moment, I acknowledged that I was sad and I acknowledged that I lost a friend. But I could also tell in that moment that God had fully wrapped his arms around me and he held me.
Mm.
And I knew that I didn't feel it. I wasn't feeling a spiritual high. I didn't feel his hand on my shoulder, but both in my head and my heart, I felt the presence and comfort of God,
Mhm.
which it was the first time, especially through that moment where it's like I didn't think that I would ever feel that, especially with suicide. I think Erin and Liz know a little bit of my history, but I've lost a couple people to suicide, and I talk about one of them specifically in my book and submission, which losing anybody is hard. But I think with suicide particular for me was the fact that, oh, they took their own life. It was a choice. It was a choice that they made. And it's something that you think that if I done this, if I done this, it's like there's nothing you could have done. It's just something that happens to you. And you don't know what to do with the aftermath. But what you do have is you have God to be there with you in the pain and to get you through it. Because people don't know what to do with it. You give it to God. And once again, building up that reliance on Him. So that, as Paul said, whether you're abounding and you're joyful, you're in the honeymoon phase, or you're starving in the desert and you don't know what to do, you can be content no matter your circumstances. Because that's learned through reliance and putting God at the forefront of your mind in those circumstances, which is not easy. It's so against our nature, especially when it's a God that people think is invisible or like it's hard to understand where he is. But going back to the prayer aspect, that's you have to fight to make him real. And you have to believe and trust that he's real. Not only do you see that through the world, you see it through other people, and then you see it through the word. You got to find him and you got to keep him there.
Yeah. I think that you pointing out that it's learned is so good and so deep because I remember the first time I heard someone say, like, you should pray for storms. I'm like I don't really feel like doing that, you know? And it goes back to that control piece like you're talking about. Fully surrendering is hard. And I was just gonna ask you, why do you think that full surrender to Christ feels threatening rather than freeing for so many believers?
It's scary when you think that you're not in control of your own life. Like, you grow up and you're a kid and, like, your parents dictate everything for you and you're dreaming about, "Oh, when I'm an adult, I get to do this, this, and this," and you think that your life's gonna be so different, and then you hit college and you move out and you're like, "Oh, stuff kinda feels the same."
Mhm.
You're just
Yeah.
instead of people telling you what to do, it's the world around you, and you yeah, I think you guys know I'm very type A. I'm very like to have everything in order, my checklists, and I like to dictate as much as I can around me. But that was before letting go. And I think it really started and really hit home with me. It's like, how much do I trust God? Like people say that, oh, I believe in him, I have faith in him. But what does it mean to trust? And trusting in God's plan means that when something is not going my way, way that I think it should, I don't immediately shut down or get angry and mad at God. Like, well, why things didn't go this way? Because he obviously knows much better than I do about everything that's going on, everything that's going on in the world, let alone in my life. But it really started actually when Erin at school, she was a senior and I was a sophomore, and she was like, yeah, I'm not caring about school anymore. I'm just giving it to God. And I was like, how?
Yeah.
How are you doing that? And she's like, yeah, I'm just focusing on him. I'm reading my Bible more. I'm spending more time in the word and he's just taking care of the school for me. And I'm like, how is that possible? And she's like, just try it. And she was, yeah, you were like, try it for a month. And then if it's not working out, you can go back to what you were doing before. So I was like, and me being very especially strict about my grades and like I was always a straight A student. I hated getting anything less than a B and I got a C in physics and a D in a class and I was just like, all right, I guess I'll try this whole trust piece and give my grades over to God and like actually I have time to read the Bible. I have time to go to the fold and fellowship. I have time to go to Friday night fellowship. I have time to go to church and prioritizing time both with believers and with God over a assignment that maybe I was gonna do the one time. We all His name was Major and he had a great way to describe it. It's the urgent versus the important. The urgent freaks us all out because we get scared because it has to be done as soon as possible. But the important has a longer timeline, and we think, oh, I can hold off on doing that. But then eventually it becomes due, and we forgot to do it because it wasn't urgent. It's God. His ways are way higher. And after we let go of what we think we have control over, and when in reality we don't, we realize how much both freeing in the sense of finally getting back to the question, freeing in the sense of we don't have to stress, be anxious, and worry about things that literally don't matter in the sense of eternity. Because we live so much in the moment and we stress about, my career and the next 20 years. But in reality, I'm not going to be a Coast Guard officer in heaven. What am I going to be? I'm going to be a child of God in heaven, which means I should be feeding that. And instead of worrying about whether I'm going to get this memo done or whether or not I'm going to turn in this Excel spreadsheet that has computers on it or whatever, or stuff that I have to do at work. God makes sure all my stuff gets done. He's the reason I passed every PFE at school because I focused on him. And like my little sister Ingrid, she's now going through college and she's constantly calling me and like, how did you seem so calm? I'm freaking out. And I'm like, because I gave it to God. Like, and it's hard for her. She's still figuring that out, but I'm praying for her, and she's hopefully gonna get through it. But
Well, we have to learn it, like
that's
you
what I
were
thought.
saying.
Yeah, you gotta learn it.
And I'm sure there was probably a lot wiser way I could have, given that advice that I gave you. Time has aged me in that way. But I think it's funny. This is like total segue. But the semester that my grades were suffering the most, and where I probably learned that, wise wisdom that I gave you, was the first semester of our third class year. Which, if you do the math, like that was when COVID hit. And so, sure enough, we get sent home. And I was convinced in that moment, both because my grades were suffering and my relationship I just had a bad breakup and everything was crazy. But I was convinced in that moment that God sent a world pandemic just for me. Because, like if he's going to take care of my grades one way, it might as well be the most elaborate way ever. Because, like, that semester, all of our grades were on a easy scale, and I got the best grades I'd gotten all through the academy that semester. Like if you trust God might send a world pandemic. Hopefully he might use like a little less like disruptive way, but yeah, funny story. Anyway, glad that advice in some form, God's grace impacted your life.
Yeah, it's cool to see how Erin's advice from years ago has like still stuck with you. Her profound advice. You've said that your Married to God book addressed relationships, but your other book, Submission, addressed sovereignty. So why was it important to you to write a second book? And what did you realize that relationship alone couldn't solve?
Yeah, it was kind of when I was finishing up Married to God that I realized that submission, largely focusing on my testimony, played much more of a major role, both in the sense of my faith, but also in how I just was living as a person. In a relationship, you can think that you have equal footing, how you treat it. Obviously, you have the different relationships. You have like a friendship, you have marriage, you have acquaintance, work. All of those are differentiated based on either your environment around you, but also on how much power you're giving the other party. And I kind of talked about this in the one-sided relationship section of the Married to God book of it's like emotional power, physical power, and the power aspect comes into the sovereignty. So in your relationship with God, how much power you're giving to yourself, but also to God. And obviously we don't want to date, so we have to be married. So how are we married? And in the end, I obviously is like, you have to give that over. You have to understand that he is king. He sent his son to die for me. I am a daughter because he is king. He is the creator. And I feel like I had to write a second book about it because I couldn't tackle that whole concept in a book that was already focused on relationship, and I didn't want to. I wanted to give it the time that it was due, especially because I think I wanted to also finally convey in a manner my testimony because I'd never really done that before because I didn't know what lesson I had learned. I thought it was in my testimony, I learned how to have a relationship with God, but in reality, I learned how to accept his sovereignty. And I learned ultimately how much he was in control of everything, both to the microbe in a plant or the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, literally the universe and the planet and the scale feel like I still love to appreciate.
You said in your book that it was a battle over sovereignty, and thankfully I lost. And that it's just like so simple, but so profound. And I think that sometimes losing control is the most loving thing that God can allow. And even in marriage, like think of like silly examples where I've had to learn to not control, like in the kitchen, for example. Like I have a certain way that I wipe the counters to where there's not going to be, you're not just wiping, you're pattern wiping so that you're like bringing the crumbs down. Anyway, things like that, little things like that that don't matter. And like I can go back and clean it later when like, but the fact that no one's cleaning the kitchen, like thank goodness. Like anyway, tangent, but there's so many things that like I don't have to control, and losing that control is often a gift, especially when it comes to my relationship with the Lord, because I mean, just to quote, man's rejection is God's direction. Like I love that quote too. Like sometimes losing control and thinking we had this perfect setup for our lives figured out. Sometimes the no that we wanted to be a yes is God's love and guidance, and that's like a gift for us. And then another question I wanted to ask you. You make it clear that submission isn't passive or one time in your book, it's daily, active, and intentional. So, what do you think that that looks like practically?
So, practically, I think especially after I finally figured out I had to submit to God, it's recognizing all the interactions where you're putting yourself in the driver's seat and have to mentally move yourself over. I think an example I can think of just at the top of my head was the PFE is a big example. Like, oh, I can just do all these sit-ups to prepare all these push-ups and work out and stress about every little minuscule thing. When in reality, it's like God's gonna make it so I either am gonna pass or I'm gonna fail, and there's nothing that I can do about it. Uh, knowing that, both prayer and I think just imaginary or just like taking whatever you're trying to hold on to and just physically just letting it go. It's like the image of you're hanging onto a boat that's sinking and Jesus is literally there with a life raft and you're refusing to jump off. It's so hard. I even said in my book, it's like submission's the hardest thing to describe because all we know how to do is to say submit when it's mentally just putting all of our fleshly expectations to death. Jeremy Camp's got a song called No Survivors where he's like, my ego, my pride, my grip on my life, throw it into the fire. Just burn it all. Burn everything that wants to put me in first and put God in front. Like mentally submitting is just every space you go into, mentally think or even say God is here. Because I think, especially when getting at this new duty station, I was slowly noticing I was developing a workplace Myah and a at-home Myah, and I wasn't one. I could feel like, oh, I'm putting my faith on the back burner when I am at work. So I was both mentally and physically, like, when I even just drove through the gate, I'm like, God is in the car, or God is on the boat. It's like, because our flesh so easily just wants to just put God into a subconscious and we can just, oh, I'm going to focus on what I need to focus on right now. And I think even Bethany Hartman quoted in the Married to God book, submitting is easy, subconsciously, hard consciously. And it's like you have to mentally keep bringing it up and letting go at the same time. It's like you're replacing the control, putting it in a little box, mailing it off, and accepting a box from God of just peace and planting it. Because that's what really you get when you are letting go of trying to control everything is you're getting peace, the replacement, and you're getting the spirit. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think it did, hopefully.
Myah, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the effort that you have put into writing these books, even being like a military officer. Like, it's really cool that you have found this sort of as a way you can kind of pour into others spiritually and have kind of a ministry outside of your work. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking all about them. And you end off your book with the idea that submission isn't loss, it's freedom. What freedom have you personally experienced by letting go of control? And also, how can people find these books as well?
Well, the freedom I found in submitting to God is really just true joy. Waking up in the morning and just with a smile on your face, not even having to think about it, of walking around my house and just seeing the spirit, just going outside and you hearing a bird and you know that that's God saying hi to you. And I'm going to probably start crying, but you don't see all the bad in the world anymore. It's like you're not focusing on what's out to get you or what's trying to hurt you. All you can see is love. And I I understand what it took to get me here. And I wish I did this sooner because I know I would have been happy a lot sooner. Um, so that's kind of why, and I think I wrote that at the beginning of my submission book, is like, learn from my mistakes, learn from where I refused to let go and to be stubborn, and instead just hopefully avoid some of at least the pain that I went through. Obviously, everyone's going to go through their own pain. Learned faster than I did. It took me long. And then where to find my books? So Married to God is public. It's out on Amazon, and I believe some major retailers like Barnes & Noble potentially will be picking it up. But right now it's off of Amazon. Soon, hopefully, I'm going to have a site that will have Married to God also on it, and I want to publish submission on that as well after I get the website up. But currently, submission is still sadly in the final editing phase. But yeah, it will hopefully soon be published. It's going to be I self-published submission actually through Blurb. And Blurb works through Ingram Books. It's a site that helps new authors sell, and they avoids like major retailers like Amazon, sadly, but it also is a lot cheaper due to convenience fees and publishing fees not being there, which is really nice. So obviously, go to Amazon if you're convenient, but if you would like it at a cheaper price, which I highly recommend, it's going to be through Ingram or Blurb, and you can just look up either Married to God, Submission, Let Go, and Let God, and they'll populate.
Yeah, we can put links in the bio of this episode as well so that people can find your books. Myah, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like what you were just saying about how you wish you would have learned this sooner, I think that most believers would say the same thing. I feel that even being a believer for a few years now, I still, every day, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have learned that lesson sooner. I wish I would have learned that lesson sooner. And I'm learning it deeper every day. So we encourage you, if you haven't submitted your life to the Lord, like, you can do it right now. God wants to meet you right where you're at. And we're just thankful that this podcast can be a tool that can help you throughout your faith journey. And as we wrap up today, we just want to leave you with this encouragement. Prioritizing your relationship with God doesn't mean getting it perfect. It just means choosing faithfulness over feelings, surrender over control, and relationship over performances. And just like marriage, our walk with God isn't built in a single emotional moment. It's built in daily decisions. It's choosing to stay, to listen, to trust, and to keep showing up even when it's uncomfortable or costly. If this episode stirred something in you, whether it's conviction, encouragement, or even resistance, don't push past that. Don't just turn off this episode. Just sit with that for a minute, pray about it, ask God what it looks like for you to move from casually believing to intentionally committing. Because when we learn to prioritize our relationship with God first, with humility, consistency, and surrender, we don't just become better spouses or friends or parents. We learn to have hope in eternity. So thank you all for joining. We've really enjoyed talking to Myah. Good to catch up with you. And with that, this has been Erin, Liz, and Myah helping you mind your mission.